Not an article, not a rumor, not a censored memoir. This time, it's Linda Ronstadt herself, directly naming the people who hurt her most during her career. 5 names, 5 stories she once thought she'd take to the grave. No one forced her. No one set her up. But when the voice finally leaves the body, sometimes the truth demands another form of expression. What she revealed changes the way we look at once glorious collaborations, seemingly flawless relationships, and the rock history we thought we understood. Everyone knows the Eagles were Linda's backup band before they became rock icons. But what many don't realize is that she gave them their first real shot. Linda chose them not because she needed help but because she believed in their musical depth. Glenn Frey, then still finding his way, was someone she truly appreciated. But as fame shifted the narrative, so did their closeness. When the Eagles skyrocketed with Hotel California, their connection to Linda was erased, publicly and privately. In a 1977 interview, when asked about their time backing solo artists, Frey brushed it off. "We learned a lot from those days, but frankly we're on our own now." Linda stayed silent, but that was the last time they shared a stage. Tensions peaked at the Hollywood Bowl during what was supposed to be a celebratory reunion. Just before finalizing the setlist, Frey's manager called to change the order. The Eagles would now close the show. Linda refused. She didn't need the spotlight, but she wouldn't allow her story to be rewritten. Frey canceled the collaboration. His last words were, "I don't think the audience will be expecting you anymore." Years later, Linda explained she didn't hate Glenn Frey. What she hated was what he came to represent, a man who got ahead by denying the steps that brought him there. When asked why she never appeared at any Eagles celebrations, she laughed and said, "Some people are comfortable living with the story they've written. I am not." She wasn't asking for gratitude, but she didn't forget being erased. When Frey passed away in 2016, Linda remained silent. She didn't attend any tributes or speak to the press. Privately, she told a friend, "I wish him peace. But I regret thinking we were allies." She doesn't care about fame, but when she thinks of Glenn, it's not about music. It's the feeling of being left out of a story she helped start. Then came Neil Young, the man who saved the world, but left her behind. Linda had admired Neil's politics and voice. In 1976, both were invited to perform at a benefit for immigrant workers in California. But from their first rehearsal, Linda sensed something off. She suggested songs like Desperado and Blue Bayou, emotional but meaningful. Neil dismissed them. "We're not here to sing salon music," he scoffed. When she pushed back, he said protest songs shouldn't be easy to hear. That night, she stood on the sidelines, excluded from the main acts. Backstage, she wept, not from rejection, but from being denied a voice in a cause she deeply cared about. She never confronted Neil. She just quietly rejected every future invitation. When an organizer once asked her to sing a duet with Neil for a live show, she simply said, "I choose not to stand next to someone who despises me." In 1978, Neil made it public. Asked about female artists in protest music, he replied, "Some have good voices but not the guts to touch what really hurts." Linda knew he meant her. And she never forgot. She never gave interviews, never lashed out. But in a quiet moment among old friends, when someone mentioned Neil Young, she said one clear sentence, "He is very good at making people believe he is on the right side, even when he's the one silencing others." Even when he later sent an apology through a mutual friend, she ignored it. Not out of hatred, but because she didn't believe in apologies that came after the damage. To her, Neil represented the kind of male artist who thought his causes were above others, and that women should stick to love songs and keep quiet during revolutions. Linda needed no permission to care about justice. But being pushed aside by someone she admired felt like suffocation. When asked years later if she'd change anything, she said, "I wouldn't have had to defend myself. Time would have done it for me." The deepest pain wasn't rejection. It was knowing someone who claimed to fight for justice dismissed her because her version of it was less loud, more heartfelt. Neil kept marching, kept singing, kept winning awards. Linda stayed silent. But within that silence, a scar remained. And if she had to name the one who made her lose faith in her allies, it was Neil. Finally, the never-ending joke, Mick Jagger. Linda Ronstadt has never been one to chase the spotlight. Though she worked with legends, she never allowed herself to be a side note. In the 1980s, She agreed to perform in a celebrity-studded charity concert. Jagger had the finale in mind, a group version of Sympathy for the Devil. Linda didn't oppose it, but after the first rehearsal, Jagger's team released promotional material featuring her photo next to him, captioned Jagger and guest vocalists, without her name and without permission. Linda said nothing publicly, but that was the last time she worked with the Stones or Jagger for over a decade. She told a friend she felt like a pawn, used to prop up someone else's ego. That silence lasted until 1987, when Jagger appeared on a late-night talk show. The host cracked a familiar joke, "Linda Ronstadt, one of the greatest voices you've ever sung with." The audience laughed. Linda did not. "How's that?" Mick smirked and replied, "She looks better when she's not singing." The audience laughed. The host laughed. The studio erupted in reflexive laughter. Only one person didn't laugh, the woman who had once stood next to him on stage, believing she was a colleague, not a prop in someone else's performance. Linda didn't respond to the press, but she wrote clearly in her diary, "They say women should laugh when men joke, but if it isn't funny, I choose to remain silent as an act of protest." Linda wasn't surprised that Jagger said that. What saddened her was the ease with which such jokes were accepted, especially coming from a male rock icon. More than anything, it was the implicit understanding that women who didn't fight back were more likely to stay in the game. She was later asked to sing on a Jagger record in the early 90s, on the condition that she change her image and be more sexy. Linda refused, flat out, without negotiation. She told her manager, "I don't have to be sexy to be asked to sing. And if that's the criteria, I don't even want to sing." It's not that she didn't appreciate Mick's talent. She once said he was such a good stage performer that he could convince the crowd every line was theirs. But to her, Mick always embodied unapologetic power, power that exploited others' images to bolster his own. Linda never expected an apology from Jagger. She believed such people rarely felt the need to say anything after being coddled for decades. But if anyone ever asked who made her lose all faith in working with people at the pinnacle of fame, Linda would have answered without hesitation, "Mick Jagger." For her, it wasn't a grudge. It was a line. And once someone crossed that line, no matter how famous, they were no longer part of her world. After difficult experiences with male artists, Linda once believed that women would be a refuge, a space of empathy, understanding, and fairness. She assumed those on the margins of power would know how to hold each other up. But not all wounds come from contempt or brutality. Some come from the very people you once admired and trusted, and because of that, they cut deeper. For Linda, that wound came from Joni Mitchell. Linda never hid her admiration for Joni, not just for her voice, but for being a woman who wrote her own songs, owned her sound, and maintained complete creative control. Linda, by contrast, was an interpreter of songs, choosing to sing others' lyrics in her own way. That often made her feel inferior next to people like Joni. In 1979, during a Rolling Stone concert, Linda performed a special arrangement of Joni's hit River. The audience responded with overwhelming positivity. After the performance, Linda approached backstage and saw Joni chatting with others. Joni turned, smiled slightly, and said, "I didn't know my songs were so popular." The remark seemed light, but Linda heard the sarcasm in every word. She didn't reply. She simply turned away and sat quietly in the dressing room for the rest of the evening. A week later, in an interview, Joni was asked about artists covering her work. She said, "I write from my blood. No one can convey that unless they've lived it." Linda read the article, folded the magazine, and never mentioned Joni to the press again. When producers later suggested Joni's songs for her ballad album, Linda declined, not because she disliked them, but because she didn't want to be tied to someone who made her feel as if she didn't have the right to express another's sadness. In the years that followed, Linda stayed neutral, neither critical nor flattering when Mitchell's name was brought up. When asked if she'd ever work with Joni again, Linda replied, "I admire talent, but I work with people who have both talent and kindness. For me, one is not enough." Joni wasn't an enemy, but she was someone who made Linda doubt her own worth, something no man had ever managed to do, even those who openly disrespected her. That didn't break Linda. If anything, it made her understand her own place in the industry. She wasn't a songwriter, but she was an artist, someone who chose songs that felt real to her and gave them life in her own voice. During a late-night studio session, she confided to a close friend, "I used to think I wasn't deep enough, that I was just the person behind someone else's songs. But then I listened to my own recordings and realized, sometimes it's the way you tell the story that makes the song mean something completely different. Not a copy, a soulful version of yourself. Linda never needed validation. But with Joni Mitchell, things were different, not because Joni was better, but because Linda believed they were on the same page. It was the indifference from someone she once idolized that haunted her for years, the feeling that she would always be seen as one step below, even if no one ever said it aloud. Among the few close friendships Linda Ronstadt had in the music industry, her bond with Dolly Parton was one of the strongest. Along with Emmylou Harris, the trio formed a musical sisterhood, producing beloved albums like Trio and Trio 2. The success of their 1987 collaboration, Trio, was undeniable, but behind the scenes, harmony didn't always carry into the studio. During the making of Trio 2, which would be released more than a decade later, Dolly asked for her vocals to be removed from some recordings due to personal and scheduling reasons. Linda and the producers agreed and moved forward with just Linda and Emmylou on a few tracks. Linda thought it was settled. But when the album was released, Dolly was reportedly surprised and unhappy with how it was handled. There was no clear communication between them afterward, no public dispute, no exchange of statements, just a silent fracture in what had once been a treasured collaboration. The press never reported a scandal, just a silence that lasted for years. Linda felt misunderstood in a space where she had once believed there was trust. For Dolly, it may not have been a misunderstanding but rather a feeling of being left out of a project she had poured her heart into. A friendship that once felt unshakable began to show cracks, not from dramatic fallout, but from small things left unresolved. Neither of them was proactive enough to pull the other back. Linda never blamed Dolly for wanting to withdraw from certain songs. She understood the pressures of scheduling and the kind of artistic control someone like Dolly always maintained. But what hurt Linda more was that neither of them had taken the initiative to sit down and clear things up. They once shared so much trust, they could create together, step on stage unrehearsed, and harmonize without saying a word. After this falling out, however, it was as if the power had been unplugged. There were no headlines, no accusations, just a quiet drifting apart. They never performed together on the same stage again for many years. In a private conversation with Emmylou Harris in 2005, Linda said something that left listeners speechless. "I'm not angry at Dolly for choosing to withdraw. I'm upset that she didn't ask me before believing that I was deliberately pushing her out." It wasn't a reproach, just a sorrowful reflection. If they had simply spoken to each other honestly, perhaps the misunderstanding would have melted away. But the space created by silence is often harder to bridge than any heated argument. Years later, when Linda, Dolly, and Emmylou were honored together at an award ceremony in Washington, they reunited. They hugged, smiled for the camera, and exchanged polite words like old friends. Everything looked proper. But Linda could feel it. Something between them was gone forever. There was no bitterness, no anger. Just a quiet awareness that something beautiful had faded, and no one had figured out how to bring it back. To Linda, Dolly was never a bad person. In fact, she described her as intelligent, sharp, and a natural producer wrapped in the shape of a folk artist. But she did acknowledge that a distance had grown between them, one rooted not in betrayal, but in both choosing silence over honesty. Linda never expected every friendship to last forever. But if there was one person she deeply regretted losing, it was Dolly Parton. In a private note, she once wrote, "There are people who are not worth keeping. But there are also people who are worth keeping. It's just a pity that we don't have time to keep them properly." Not all wounds come from betrayal. Some are slow, quiet cuts that never truly heal, because they come from a trust that was once deeply real. Linda Ronstadt doesn't share these stories to hurt anyone. She doesn't ask for apologies, nor does she need anyone to take her side. But in a world where female artists are often told to smile and stay quiet for the sake of their image, speaking up, even if it's late, is an act of value. If this story made you think about the darker side of fame or gave you a new perspective on Linda's voice and legacy, let us know in the comments. And if you think others deserve to hear the hidden corners of stories like this, about legends who rarely show anger but carry deep truths, like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Linda has told her part. Now, it's your turn.